This is Conspirinormal.
Hello, everyone. It's your host, Adam. Welcome back to Conspirinormal. Seriah is here as well.
We just got through with a really cool live broadcast with Dr. Future about the Georgia Guidestones and how he helped crack the mystery, in which he got vindicated recently with some mainstream press coverage, so that was cool.
Yeah, they ended up talking about his research on John Oliver. They didn't mention him by name, but you guys should have heard that last week. This will go up before this episode. So, but time-wise, Seriah and I just finished that up about like 40 minutes ago. So, but tonight we have a good friend of ours of the show that we haven't had on in a few months.
At least, yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while. You guys can hear him. I think you guys can guess who this is. It's Mr. Seriah from Where Did the Road Go? Welcome back to Conspirinormal.
Mr. Seriah. I don't know if that works.
Dr. Seriah?
Does that make you feel weird, Seriah?
Esquire?
Somebody refers
Yeah.
to
We'll just go with Seriah.
Mega Seriah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's all right. That one's fun.
You like that.
That could be a wrestler.
Or Frater Seriah.
Frater?
Yeah.
I like that. Nice. Well, I guess that would mean you were like in the OTO now if you're a frater.
Yeah, and I'm definitely not in the OTO.
Yeah, no, you're definitely not in the OTO. That's sure. That's true.
I am not an organization person.
Yeah. None of us blame you for that. But tonight we're just going to kind of have like a little freewheeling discussion. I think the last time I was on there, we did kind of like one of your Wandering the Road episodes.
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
And but we are going to talk about, have like kind of a topic that we're going to talk about tonight. But I do want to say off the bat that Seriah is going to be doing our next Strange Realities online event that we just decided is going to be on June 29th. And we'll talk about what Seriah is going to talk about that night. That's going to be on a Wednesday night this time. We're going to try kind of like a different night, just for reasons, and we'll see how that goes. But we're happy to have you doing that with us, Seriah. And
well, thanks for asking me.
yeah, we'll talk a little bit about what you're gonna discuss, what you're gonna talk about. But tonight, I really want to talk about something that you mention quite often on Where Did the Road Go? And that is the Seth Material.
Yeah.
And this is like kind of like a group of like channeled texts that
it's books. It's so this started out my exposure to it started out, I thought I had picked this book up at a used book sale. I just recently found in my notes that actually my mom had been given the book to donate to the library along with a bunch of other books. And I happened to look through them and went, oh, the Seth Material, this would probably be good for a laugh, and asked her if I could have it. And she was like, yeah, sure. They were donations. So, and then I put it away and didn't look at it for, something like 8 years. And I ended up digging it out because I was looking at anything new online I could find. This was like maybe 98, 99, anything new on near-death experiences. And I would look at these websites, and some of them were very woo, but some of them were very scientific in their approach to this stuff, looking at the evidence, but so many of them would also reference Seth. And after a while, I'm like, why are all these otherwise non-woo sites referencing this one particular channeled entity? And so I dug around until I found the book, which was buried behind a bunch of other books. And I flipped through it to a chapter on death. And what Seth described that happens when you die not only fits near-death experiences, but fit one of the few things that I did find from new research on near-death experiences that we definitely did not know when those books were written. In fact, we didn't even know. I mean, I'm sure we knew near-death experiences happened, but the term wasn't there. Raymond Moody hadn't written his books on it yet. It wasn't in popular culture whatsoever.
I want to give a little bit of background here in a second, but just to say, was this Seth Material, printed, I guess, published in 1970?
Seth Speaks.
Okay, that's 1972.
Okay.
But was this actually? I mean, that's when it was published. So was it actually written before that?
Yeah, but I thought Seth Speaks was the first one. Maybe not.
Yeah, according to this, it says Seth Material was 1970. But Seth Speaks is the book that you have.
Yeah, well, I have most of the books.
Most of the books, okay.
And I've read most of the books.
Of which I noticed one time a few years ago, Sergio and I were in a used bookstore here in Nashville, and I saw several copies.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and they've all been reprinted and stuff.
Yeah, so they were, I guess, extremely popular at the time.
Yes, yeah.
Mass market paperback.
Yep. They definitely, and that's probably why it was being donated to the library, because somebody had it.
Can you go in a little bit of the background of like Jane Roberts and then how she started channeling?
Yeah, so
this entity?
She was using a Ouija board, and that's how she apparently made contact with Seth. And eventually she was able to speak directly for Seth. And I guess at first Seth didn't actually say his name was Seth. He was saying he was a guy who passed away or something like that. And exactly what you'd expect from a Ouija board. And later said that he wasn't lying about that because that was one of his personalities. But now you were talking to the core personality. And that's what was being channeled through Jane. As I read, so she did that for a while. And then basically what she did is she held these free ESP classes, as she called them. And people would come from all over and they'd sit in, and she would talk about particular subjects and then interact with everyone in the class, and never charged any money for it. And people absolutely swore by the validity of the data they were getting. She managed to actually help a lot of people with this stuff. There's no... one of the things when I started getting into this, because I was so anti-channeling, I was like, okay, has anyone like debunked the Seth Material? Are there any massive contradictions or anything? And there really aren't. The data is very, very consistent, very detailed. It's generally considered probably the most genuine case of channeling that anyone has done so far. Now, what that means, it's a little hard to say. Because, we don't exactly know what channeling is. Jane didn't remember most of the time that she was Seth. Sometimes she did, sometimes she didn't, which definitely points to it being an altered state of consciousness, just like hypnosis. Jane herself said she didn't know what this was, if this was a legitimate entity, if it was her contacting her, subconscious mind. There's no indication that she was faking it. They weren't getting rich off of this stuff. The only thing they did do is they wrote the books, and Seth would just dictate out these books in sessions. And that's one of the really impressive things is, again, the books don't contradict themselves, and there's tons of data there. And it never like falls back where Seth says one thing and then says another. The amount of detail would be near impossible for somebody to do the way she did it.
And this was dictated to her husband, who wrote all this down.
Yes. Yeah. And they lived in Elmira, New York, not too far from here.
Right.
And actually, he was alive until just before I started Where Did the Road Go? She died in like 84.
Yeah, she died pretty young. I mean, she was only in her 50s.
Yeah, she had, what was it? Rheumatoid. It was rheumatoid. I think it was rheumatoid arthritis. She was unable to stand or do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a spiritualist history in Elmira?
Not that I'm really aware of, but I mean the
whole region, right, of upstate New York is.
Yeah, there's bits of it all over the place because you have the Fox sisters,
right,
which are not that far away from here. You got the whole Mormon movement coming out of that area in Elmira and stuff. It wasn't Elmira? It was really
Palmyra.
Palmyra. Was it Palmyra?
Yep, that's where Uncle Joe had his vision.
So yeah, I'm trying to look at what actually killed Jane Roberts. But I'm pretty sure it was a very bad case of rheumatoid arthritis, and she was dictating while she was in the hospital for treatments for this. So the last book, the The last book is right up pretty much until days before she died.
Oh, really?
And I always love this quote. It says New Age writer Michael Talbot, but Michael Talbot wrote the Holographic Universe and basically looked at all this stuff through the filter of quantum physics and stuff. He says, to my great surprise and slight annoyance, I found that Seth eloquently and lucidly articulated a view of reality that I had only arrived at after great effort and extensive study of both paranormal phenomena and quantum physics.
Well, there's something very, as I understand it, very natural about how Seth communicated.
Yeah.
Like, it really wasn't like this kind of weighty, kind of archaic language. Like, so,
no, not
like
at all.
Get from like Edgar Casey, or even that you get now from some of these channelers, and that it seemed like very, very natural. And even, you know, I think from what you've said before that, you know, Seth even had like some kind of had a sense of humor.
Yes.
Even would joke, and you know, so it was very, very, very human.
Absolutely.
You could call it an entity, but it didn't act entity-like, I guess you could say.
It was a personality.
Right.
And Seth's explanation of what he was is that he was the oversoul of Jane and a bunch of other lives that were all happening simultaneously, because he said time doesn't really exist from the perspective he's at, and that what he was saying was not literally what he was saying, because it was going through the filter of Jane.
Right.
So Jane's beliefs, Jane's views of the world and stuff would translate what he was saying and how it came out. So he's like this, and he also never claimed to be omnipotent. He said he didn't know everything just because he was not, incarnated at the moment. Being disincarnate didn't give you, total knowledge of everything. He never claimed to be anyone spectacular in history. Mm-hmm. So he did a lot. It was very different from a lot of the channeled stuff that you see outside of it, both contemporary and after it, where, it's like Ramtha was like, an Atlantean warrior prince or something like that. And other people were these big figures in history. And Seth was like, yeah, I was no one special.
He was like some guy called Seth.
No, he was never called. I don't think he was ever called Seth. I think Seth is the personality as it's translated through Jane.
So where did the name come from?
I don't know. I think he said Jane just liked the name, and so he chose it or something.
So Jane chose to call him that.
No, I think he picked it because Jane liked it. I don't remember exactly. That was. It has been a long time since I've sat down and read those books entirely.
So what was Seth's main goal, and what information was he trying to impart? For what reason?
So his main thing was teaching us about reality, how reality worked, and how to improve our lives. And it was not this love and light sort of thing. Like, he would make a point that bad things happen because sometimes you need bad things to happen. And that even if you are, in a sense, like following where you're supposed to be, you're still going to encounter ups and downs. And he did have that sort of like you create your own reality thing going on. But again, it's not like you get with like The Secret and stuff like that. That seems like a very watered down version of what Seth was trying to explain. And you guys said that comes from New Thought.
Yeah.
See, and I didn't realize that. I thought that was a straight ripoff of the Seth Material.
Oh, no, that's totally New Thought mental science.
But yeah, so Seth was, very, very, very rational about it, and how you create reality. And it's not a matter of just like making things what you want, but you're here. He would say you're here to create. You're here to create your own reality, to create art, to express yourself. And that's the type of stuff you should push through. But everyone's here for a different reason. And, some people are here to do bad things so that people have good things to fight against, which is not the way a lot of the whole love and light thing, comes across.
Yeah. Yeah. That does seem to be a part of New Age belief. I've noticed that there's this whole idea of you choose you choose your fate before you're born type of thing.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, I've noticed that in a lot of New Age circles. I don't know if that necessarily reflects what Seth was talking about, but I'd have seen that before.
Yeah, I mean, because Seth also talked of reality as being multidimensional, using sort of the quantum idea of multi, every choice breaking off into a new universe.
Yeah.
So he would explain that you have like a primary universe, which is where your main consciousness is based, but it might not be somebody else's prime universe. And that when you die, you can actually access those other universes and see how different choices would have taken you different places. He also mentions the life review process, which, we know of from near-death experiences. And how did he explain it? He explained that I think it was Seth that said in your life review, you feel not only are you experiencing what you did, but you're experiencing how you made other people feel as well. So you're kind of experiencing the repercussions of your actions, both good and bad.
Yeah, that clicks with what I've heard in the near-death experiences. I think you're right that Raymond Moody does write about that too. And
Cheryl Lee Black, who's been on the show a million times, also said that that's what she experienced as well. And you got to wonder, like some of these people who, like someone like Hitler, who was responsible for, torture and death of so many people, do they feel every one of those in their life review?
Well, let's hope so.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and even, someone who's like any kind of leader who is sending people off to war, do they feel the consequences of all those people who died for them because of their decision?
There's a lot of instances of religious dogmas that, people kind of wash their hands by letting other groups do the dirty work. So like, I know there's a lot of Southeast Asian Buddhists who explain their lack of vegetarianism through that, and they have religious minorities do the butchering. So who knows? I want to ask if this represents like a synthesis of newer science and physics and this cosmological spirituality, because that's kind of a theme that's happened before, that was especially happening with the birth of theosophy and some things like that. Is this like a synthesis of science and religion almost?
There wasn't really a lot of religion in it. It was mostly just like him talking about the nature of reality.
But it's a spiritual worldview, though.
Yes, it is definitely a spiritual worldview. That basically consciousness forms reality. So yes, in that sense it is. But he also, would talk about things that we were going to discover in science that then kind of came out sometime after that. The near-death experience thing that I had noticed is there was a researcher who was one of these skeptical doctors who decided he was going to do research on near-death experiences, and he found that the people, not only was he absolutely convinced these were real after doing this research, but he gave a survey to absolutely everybody he did a heart work on. And so I forget what percentage had near-death experiences, but even if they didn't, he had them fill out this survey saying, what do you think happened during the operation, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that convinced him is that the people who had near-death experiences would be dead on 100% correct about everything going on in the room that they claimed to be able to see. Whereas the people who did not have a near-death experience weren't even close. Like it was completely opposite, like if they had to make up what they thought was happening, they didn't even get remotely close. It came across as something like you would see on television, which of course is not how that stuff works. But the other thing he discovered is that not everyone who died had a near-death experience, and not everyone who had a near-death experience died. So that was kind of the new thing I took out of that, where I was like, well, that's really interesting. And as I'm reading that chapter on death with Seth, he's talking about how there's no point of death. Some people will leave their bodies before they're even dead. Other people's will stick around in their bodies because they don't want to leave it. There's no like singular point of death. And I'm going, did you just explain near-death this research I just read?
Death with Seth.
And, he's talking about how you will initially get what you believe to happen when you die. So it's sort of a morphic reality that, you work your way through, which makes sense because you get, most people will see what they expect to see deep down. It's kind of catered to them personally when people have near-death experiences.
Culturally, yeah.
So that was really interesting. And then I think the other thing in Seth Speaks that kind of got me was I never understood Crowley's whole lust for result thing. Crowley would always say, when you're doing magic, you beware lust for result, because if you focus on something, the ritual you did isn't going to work, And I was always like, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, you would think if you're trying to psychically affect something, focusing on it would be the thing you want to do. And so Seth is talking about how we create reality. And he's saying, the way that we create reality is through symbols. And those symbols need to reach the unconscious mind to have any effect. You can't keep them in the conscious mind. And I suddenly sat there and went, oh my God, he just freaking explained lust for result.
What I'm curious about is Jane Roberts, whether or not this was just another part of her personality. And you've said that before, Seriah. I've heard you say it. But there was some interesting stuff. I mean, she had had a hard childhood. And there seemed to have been some abuse involved. It looked like it was probably physical abuse. And we know sometimes with that, there can be, I don't know, the just trauma in and of itself.
Yes, can open people up to these experiences. Absolutely.
Right,
that's one of the things Kenneth Ring discovered when he did his survey of near-death experiences and people who had UFO experiences, is that he coined it the encounter-prone personality. Mm-hmm. And one of those common elements was past trauma. So I don't know. I don't remember much about Jane's past.
Yeah.
It seems like they had a pretty good marriage. He was an artist. She was an artist too, I believe. Or maybe she was just a writer. She did write a couple of books. Some fictional books based on the Seth ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she wrote poetry before that.
Yeah, it says that she was in a strictly run Catholic orphanage in Troy, New York, while her mother was hospitalized in another city for treatment of her arthritis. So she had some kind of family issues and just some separation.
And she ultimately succumbed to some of those same health issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So whether this was some kind of coping mechanism, or obviously I'm not leaving that there's a doubt that she could have actually channeled something.
Oh yeah, certainly. I mean, we don't know what this stuff is. I mean, she didn't know. That was one of the things I was impressed with, is at no point did she make any absolute claims. She said, I don't know what this is. I just know that I can do it.
What about other witnesses of these channeling sessions? Are these is this only her and her husband, or were there ever third parties?
They had whole classes there.
Okay.
Yeah, they would have the room full of people every week or every month, however often they were doing it.
And there's a lot of testimonials that no kind of trickery was going on.
No, and there's video of it. I wouldn't necessarily recommend watching the video. It makes me really uncomfortable watching the video. Her actual channeling of Seth it's weird.
Really? In what way?
Her voice is strange. The movements are strange. It's just, I don't know. It weirds me out trying to watch it out, because initially I was like, oh my God, there's video. And then I'm watching the video and I'm like, nope, cannot take this seriously. Watching the video, must go back to the books.
So that's interesting, Seriah. So it freaks you out to see that, but then it's kind of bizarrely silly too, in a way.
Yeah, it's over exaggerated and yeah, I don't know. It was just it wasn't something I wanted to watch.
Yeah. Huh.
And I know other people who were into Seth who said the exact same thing. Because the books are almost eloquent, right. And when you listen to it, it's not eloquent at all. It looks like someone being puppeted.
I'm gonna have to check some of that out.
Yeah. I wasn't aware that there was anything like that.
Is there a short audio recording that you know where it's at on YouTube or something that we could play?
Not offhand, no.
Okay.
We'll find something.
We'll find something.
It is on YouTube, so if you search it, you can find it.
I bid you good evening.
How's it going?
And understand your responses to our friend here. For when he speaks, you fear the vocabulary. Because you fear the beliefs that you still are afraid of it. You are afraid that after all, for all of your hard-earned knowledge, the others are right. You are not sure of your position, and therefore you must defend it.
Seth Material style and this whole thing. Before I realized that people, you might use them or think of them as symbols, or you might, no matter how you relate to them, they have their own fantastic individuality. And whenever any beliefs, even our own, blind you to that, you have lost. Whenever you relate to someone as simply a belief, or you get your back up and you don't see their reality, then we've won. We'll bring you closer to people. It will not divide you. If it divides you, that is not what it is.
The other thing is that she regularly submitted to any kind of psychic tests or anything like that where people could verify whether or not, this was real to her. And for the most part, she'd do these tests and then just get no response back. So there was a healthy amount of skepticism seeming to come from her and her husband about what this was. But at the same time, kind of like Carlos Castanada's stuff, I mean, we know Castaneda just kind of pieced it all together from different sources, but those sources were legitimate, and the information, some of the stuff Castaneda talks about does work. And it's the same thing with Seth, regardless of where it came from. The Seth stuff does work. And one of the interesting things I found, because I'd find when I read it a lot, I started having really strange dreams. And other people have told me that very same thing, that if they read a lot of Seth, especially right before they go to sleep, they have really strange dreams.
What are some of the dreams that you've had?
Oh, I don't remember off the top of my head.
I'm just curious if they involve Seth. I don't know.
No, they didn't involve Seth. They would just be really more vivid and weird dreams.
Maybe something about the language.
It could be.
Put you in some kind of trance or something.
Or just had enough of an impact. I mean, it's fairly deep stuff as you read through it.
Yeah. Very philosophical kind of.
Yeah. And he speaks about God as the all that is. So he says nothing we experience is not a part of the all that is. And we are just a tiny sliver of what that entirety is.
And this is really a foundational thing for the modern New Age movement.
Yeah.
We know of that because it seems like it was the most recent authority or really prolific channeled source that had this kind of universal message for mankind, saying that there is truth to different religions. That's kind of a lot of the basis of what we call the New Age movement since then, since the 70s.
And like I said, what I liked was the skepticism, was the fact that Seth wasn't claiming to be an authority. He was just saying, this is what I know from my experience. He claimed that personality did survive death. but that it changes. So you kind of don't lose who you are, but you kind of connect to the bigger part of yourself as well.
Are there any passages in those books that stand out to you, Seriah?
The one I always go back to is Seth talking about how time works here, and him saying that time passes at the rate that your brain can process reality. And I always thought that was fascinating because it is completely true. When you think about it, time flies when you're busy or you're having fun and you're really engaged in something. Time just zips right by. But if you just sit there staring at a clock, time slogs.
Yeah, it's all perception.
Yeah. So the more reality you're processing, the faster time goes.
What struck you particularly? I mean, going back to kind of like the near-death stuff. What I know that you talked about Raymond Moody and how some of that echoes what Moody later writes about. And I mean, just like the near-death experience in and of itself. But was there anything else that really like struck you in particularly about that?
About the near-death stuff?
Oh yeah.
Not really. I mean, it just seemed to be very dead on to what was late. And that was one of the things. I'm like, okay, when was this book published? Okay, when did the first near-death stuff come out? Oh, like 4 years later. Okay, so it wasn't just being pulled out of the near-death literature, but it matches the near-death literature. And it, like I said, it matched things that were happening that were more current discoveries in the late 90s, like people were having these experiences even when they didn't die. Mm-hmm. That Seth also talks about. He also talks about people, you know, when you're born, you don't always come right, you know, you're not always in your body right away. Sometimes some people are wait until after they're born to enter their bodies, and some people are in their bodies from the point of conception.
Do you feel like it kind of brings some validity into some of Seth's material?
Yeah, I don't think I looked very hard to find anything that could be distinctly disproven about the Seth material, where Seth said something, because there's a lot of things Seth says very specifically, where someone was like, he was absolutely wrong, and I wasn't able to find anything. The biggest criticisms came from generally Christian sources, which claimed that Seth was a demon that eventually killed Jane. And the other ones were from the materialists who were like, well, all of this is nonsense. We don't actually have to debunk it.
Right.
But if you looked up other channelers, you could find all kinds of data of where they contradicted themselves, where things didn't always match up. So, you know, that part was really interesting. And this happened, I guess, while or after they had already channeled this particular information. But he talks about, one of the weird things is he talks about previous cultures. He says Atlantis existed, and he calls a previous culture Lumania instead of Lumeria.
Right.
And I always thought that was just strange to go with that, but okay, whatever. But he talks about them having sonic technology, and that most of their tech was based around sound, which, and you know, in the last 20, 30 years, we see more and more that these ancient cultures had some kind of sound technology that we don't understand. And he talks about cave paintings, and he says particularly in the areas around the border of France and Spain that will eventually be discovered that we will not be able to see what is actually there. Like, we'll discover these paintings and they'll look really great, but there's more to them than we can actually perceive. And then shortly afterwards, they discovered I forget the name of the cave that has the almost 3-dimensional images, and they're like 30,000 years old or whatever.
Lascaux?
Yes, Lascaux.
Yeah.
And so Robert writes in there, he's like, as of this printing, the Lascaux caves have just been found in an area of France and seem to match up with what Seth is talking about. Because when you look at those cave paintings, they're like incredible works of art. They're not just scratches on the wall.
So that gives some kind of like foreknowledge of something that had not been discovered yet.
Right. Seth did not make a lot of predictions because he said time is not like a singular thing. You can't really do that. But yeah, those cave paintings, and when you think about it, those cave paintings were probably made by shamans who were ingesting different substances. So when they were making those paintings, they probably are trying to represent something that we can't see the way we see things now.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say a lot of them were in those cave paintings. I think that the abstractions of those paintings and just the way that they look. I mean, that has been a theory for a little while now, that there was some hallucinogens going into that.
Oh yeah, yeah. And Graham Hancock does a good job of probably getting as close to proof as we're going to have anytime soon for that.
Is that in Supernatural?
Yeah,
that he talks about that. I've never read that one.
It's a little bit dry going through all the cave painting stuff because he wants to really present a good case for it.
Yeah.
But it is, it's there. I'm trying to think what the other thing was. There was another thing that kind of blew me away when I discovered it in the Seth Material. I can't remember what it is. It definitely, it took me, I was in a very severely depressed state when I picked up that book. And by the time I finished the book, which only took me a couple of days, the depression was gone.
It had that much of a profound effect on you.
Yeah, it really did, because it just gave me a whole bunch of new stuff to look at, like a whole new way of looking at reality, where I initially went in like, what is this nonsense? And then it's like, holy crap, this is really interesting.
How old were you when that happened?
28, maybe?
Yeah, that's impressive stuff.
So, even if it was completely made up, it still has an effect on people. Like I said, Castanada's stuff, we know Castaneda, made a lot of the story of Don Juan up.
Yeah.
He just used old, but he did the research. So he uses actual shamanic techniques in his books.
I guess you could say Don Juan was probably some kind of an amalgamation of different characters that he met, I guess.
Yeah, or just read about.
Yeah. I know Adam Gorightly's written about that, that there was Castaneda made a lot of stuff up.
Yeah, yeah. But the fact is, if you do the stuff that because Seth will teach you these techniques in these classes, and they're in the books. If you utilize those techniques, it actually does do something. That's the thing. Like, they're effective. And that's what a lot of people found. Like, people kept going to the ESP classes were in high demand. And like I said, they never charged a penny for them.
So prior to the Seth Speaks book, she actually wrote a book about training herself to use ESP, right?
Yeah, she did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Because she was fascinated by that stuff.
Does that make you more skeptical in any kind of way?
No,
just
not
because, really. But you could see how it could lend to some skepticism that she was already really, pre-exposed to these ideas of channeling, I'm sure.
Sure. Oh yeah, probably. And she was using a Ouija board trying to connect with something.
Right.
So I don't think her being interested in it makes me more skeptical. It makes sense that if you're interested in, you're working toward that goal, some people are successful. It's definitely helped change my view of channeling altogether. Because the only other one that seemed to have any validity to it was Edgar Casey's stuff. And even his stuff a lot of times just seems really kind of out there.
Yeah, Edgar Casey's stuff is way out there.
But he would also prescribe, weird cures for people that seem to work. Now, whether that says something about, the placebo effect or what, who the hell knows?
Yeah, and he was considered the sleeping prophet. So
right.
Like, he would be sleeping physically, and then he would start to speak. But Jane Roberts, I don't think, it was more of a trance-like state for her. So like there was this idea that I guess that she was more awake during it, or more active during.
Well, she said usually she didn't remember anything of the session.
Yeah, of whatever Seth said.
Right. She would have to go back and look at her husband's notes. And sometimes she wouldn't look at them for a while, apparently. And that's the other thing. Again, the consistency is really impressive.
Was there a preparation that she did before she would go into these trance states?
No, I don't think there was. And I think she would even drink
come out of nowhere
cigarettes while she was doing it.
I mean, would it just come out of nowhere? Or did she set intention to go into these states?
Oh yeah, no. She would sit down and put her in relax, and it would just happen after a while.
Okay.
Well, I would say that she was predisposed to all this. I mean, obviously, since she wrote this other book, and she was into it all, and like you said, she used the Ouija board, and just one day, just like stuff kind of just clicked for her, and it just started to happen, and like we said, I mean, it could have been another part of her personality.
And whereas the multidimensional stuff was out there, but it wasn't like it is now, where it's like part of the pop culture. But it was kind of in the hippie culture at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's entirely possible some of that came from that. But yeah, I mean, like, I seriously, when I read through that book, I was looking for something to be like, aha, see, that's BS. And I was like, oh man, I can't really find anything. He talks about UFOs very briefly. And he says something like, I don't remember the exact quote, but he says something like, because someone says, what are UFOs? And he goes, well, those are other consciousnesses entering your reality from outside. And then he stopped and said, I'm actually kind of surprised you can see them. And this was way before the idea of UFOs being conscious was a thing.
Instead of it being some kind of physical thing.
Right.
Yeah.
He said, things can travel in time and different realities, but what's traveling is consciousness, not material things.
That seems to kind of jive with what we talk about a lot on your show and on mine.
Yeah. He also called Jane Rupert because that was one of her past lives.
Okay.
As a man, so he always addressed her as Rupert. So,
did he ever say that he was like a past life of hers, or?
No, he was kind of the oversoul.
Yeah.
So he had other, and one of the interesting things too, they're talking about like incarnating as different things, and he says, he incarnated as a tree once because he just wanted to kind of like relax. And he says something like, he talks about like families of consciousness, like how there are different types of families that are similar in style of consciousness, and they tend to reincarnate together.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, someone asked about animals or something. He's like, and he says something about having a life as a dog once, but he's lost track of it.
Hope it was a good life.
And well, the way he expresses it, it's almost like you eventually become an oversoul. Like as you progress through life, you eventually get to the point where you're creating other lives to put out there.
But there's no ultimate ego survival after death.
There's the survival of personality.
There is. Okay.
Yeah, that's a big thing that he expresses. That the personality does survive death. It changes, but it does survive death.
So did he have any concepts of like heaven and hell, or any kind of like divine punishment kind of concepts?
No, just the experiences you get when you die.
And I guess he would say like those kind of like life review. I mean, that's enough, I suppose. Like that's your kind of like your purgatory in a way.
Right. Well, he also would talk about how you're incarnating for a purpose most of the time.
Yeah.
So sometimes, like I said, he would say sometimes people incarnate simply to make a challenge to other people. You need bad in the world for the good to grow.
Yeah, I think that's the explanation of evil.
Yeah.
Well, is there anybody now that kind of continues this on, or that you've read?
There are people who claim to channel Seth, but one of the things Seth said is that no one else will ever be able to channel Seth because Seth is the combination of this being who's not incarnate and Jane Roberts. Right. So it was literally impossible for somebody to channel Seth. But of course, numerous people claim to have channeled Seth and don't have anywhere near the depth of data coming through.
So it's very like specific that once Jane was gone, once she died, it would be incomplete.
Right.
Yeah. That's some interesting concepts.
Yeah, and there's so many books out there now too. I think I've read all the main ones. The last one she did, The Way Toward Health, is a little depressing because that's when she's in the midst of dying. And Robert keeps leaving, little notes in there about how she's doing, and it's just kind of sad to read because you can kind of feel how really torn up about everything he is.
So some of these other books, of course, you had 1970, The Seth Material, 1972, Seth Speaks, The Eternal Validity of the Soul. I guess that's the
main one.
And then 74, Nature of Personal Reality. Now, I'm guessing that these are just books that were also penned by Seth, but they didn't have the Seth moniker on them. Right.
Well, they usually have something about Seth on there.
Yeah.
But yeah, Seth actually was the one writing the books.
Ymir's Education in the Proper Use of Magical Powers. That's actually children's literature.
Yeah, I don't remember that one.
I don't know. The Oversoul 7 trilogy. Now, this is stuff from the 90s.
Yeah, that was written by Jane. That's fiction written by Jane.
Okay. So they've lumped them in together on this list here. And I guess she must have been interested in art because there's things about Rembrandt, Paul Cézanne.
Yeah,
as well. So that is not exactly stuff that's, if you go to the Wikipedia page, there's stuff lumped in here that she wrote that wasn't necessarily part of the Seth Material.
Right. And there's a 2-volume Nature of Reality book, which is fantastic. I'm just looking for some quotes. All religions are distortive. For that matter, much of your science is distortive. Both arrive at approximations, at best, of reality. Religion has been the cause of much prejudice and cruelty, but the bomb over Hiroshima was not caused by the Catholic Saint Teresa showering down any roses. The distortions in science and religion have been truly disastrous. Science is apt to turn into another religion if it has not done so already. Any fanaticism is truly vicious, one-sided, limiting, and causes an alarming shrinkage of focus that is explosive and dangerous.
So this criticism of both science and religion and this ultimate way forward through some kind of synthesis.
Right. Without the extremism.
Any other quotes stand out to you, Seriah?
I'm looking here. It's hard because I'm trying to read these while I'm talking with you guys about it.
Yeah.
But there's a bunch of Seth groups on Facebook.
So this stuff still has a huge following even today.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I've met people through finding out they were into Seth Material and just talking to them about it.
Is there more of a base up there in upstate New York still?
No, not really.
It's just more spread out all across the country.
There's an unending conversation going on throughout the universe, and a most meaningful one. That was just a short one.
Yeah. There probably is a book that's just quotes, maybe.
Oh yeah, you can look up just Seth quotes, definitely. But a lot of them taken out of context don't make a whole lot of sense until you read, the whole chapter or whatever.
Yeah.
Let's see. Since the two of you together follow more or less the same pattern of reaction there, you are faced with spotty results. A child knows something will go away if you pretend it doesn't exist. To the adult, seems like the sheerest of nonsense, yet the child's connections with the heroic dimension still remind him of the truth. As it is, you express very little of your entire personhood. You have other minds. You have other minds that are invisible. When you use all of these minds, then and only then do you become fully aware of your surroundings. You perceive reality more clearly than you do now, more sharply, brilliant, and concisely. At the same time, however, you comprehend it directly. You accept as yourself those other states of consciousness native to those other minds. You achieve true personhood. And we certainly know there's multiple states of consciousness that we are fully unaware of. There is no road. There is no road to truth. No one road to where the answers appear like road signs, and you only have to follow. The road to truth is no road. It is a series of steps within yourself, ever miraculous and ever new.
A little bit before we leave the subject, I want to ask you. You talked about how this kind of affected you. I mean, and you were pretty much like the person that I hear most about this from. Is this something that has really had a real profound effect on your life?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, aside from pulling me out of the depression, in studying all this stuff, like the quote from Michael Talbot I threw out there at the beginning, like I look at, I find something new and be like, oh yeah, Seth talked about this,
So there's a lot of this material that you go back to whenever, like, especially you're doing your show. You do talk about it. You're like, oh yeah, Seth.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll be like, I don't want to bring up Seth again, but I can't not bring up Seth again.
That's the prime reason why I was like, I wanted to get you back on. I was like, we never have really talked about this in depth.
And like I said, it's probably Seth himself said this is not all right. I don't know everything.
Yeah.
But the thing is, there's enough substantial stuff in there that's really, really interesting. And it definitely had an effect on me, and it's had an effect on other people. That doesn't mean it's, that Seth was really this oversoul and that everything he described was right. But like I said, the practices actually work. The stuff he talks about actually works. It makes sense. This one's from Seth Speaks. It says, since consciousness forms matter and not the other way around, then thought exists before the brain and after it.
Yeah, it's because even if it was just Jane Roberts, her another alternate personality or whatever, it doesn't make it any less profound.
Exactly. So it over the years, I've become a little less critical of the whole channeling thing, because it seems like most people probably are picking up something. I mean, unless they're just absolute charlatans,
Yeah, well, that too.
Yeah.
But, it may just be that Jane had a very clear connection to whatever she was channeling, whereas a lot of people don't, or their ego starts getting in the way and taking it over.
Well, I think it's very rare, like Seth saying that I don't have all the answers. I may not be right. I mean, would you hear that from Ramtha? I don't think you would.
No, and that's exactly it. But yet they did studies on Jay-Z Knight where she definitely was showing different brain waves and stuff when she was channeling. So something was going on that was legitimate. But whether the information was legitimate or just channeled through her ego, who knows? Yeah.
And when things start to get political, that's when you gotta watch out. That there is something odd going on there. That's for sure. Is there anything else you want to say about that before we kind of move on to a couple other things?
It's worth picking up Seth Speaks and reading through it and see if it connects with you.
Yeah.
He also talks about the other thing he talks about that I find very interesting, and I connected this when I read Illuminations, how there's sort of a mass conception of reality, like we all affect reality in some ways. So certain events happen, like big events happen because they need to happen to kind of shake things up. And he, when I was reading Illuminations from Willette, he's talking about how, UFO waves are hitting areas where there's a lot of political turmoil and stuff like this, or like World War II, things like that, where he's connecting it to a mass psi event.
Right. Yeah. I remember that episode. Yeah, that was a good episode.
Yeah, and that's not completely different from what Seth is saying, that when enough people need that change to happen, something to shake things up, they kind of create that reality. And I'm like, they're using different words, but they're kind of saying something similar with this.
So let's move on from the Seth Material. I want to talk a little bit about some of the other stuff you've had on the show. Kind of have been getting caught up on where did the road go recently. We'll talk about these strange disappearance stuff here in a second, but this lady that you interviewed that actually knew Manly P. Hall, thought that
Tamara
was really interesting. Yeah, that was That was very interesting in some of the things that she talked about. What kind of your impressions of that?
I never knew any of that happened to her. I've known her forever, and that stuff never came up.
Never let you know, huh?
Mostly my interactions with her were just over her punk band.
Oh, yeah?
So I've been playing her since I think she said I was the first radio station to actually play her stuff.
Now, is she in that like Ithaca area, or is she somewhere else?
No, she's in like LA or whatever.
LA? Okay.
Yeah, I've never met her, never actually talked to her until I did that interview.
Really?
We just talked online. It started back in the AOL days.
So did she just like mention like, oh, by the way, I used to like go to Manly P. Hall lectures?
No, the Inner Tradition sent it. And so I'm like, what's this book?
It's a book, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh, Manly P. Hall by Tamara Lucid. Tamara Lucid. I'm like, what the? Wait a minute. And then I wrote her, and I'm like, you wrote a book? And she's like, oh, they sent you the book?
Not interesting synchronicity there, Seriah. Was there anything that was interesting to you in that book that you didn't know, or?
I know very little about Manly P. Hall, to tell you the truth. Like, aside from the name and a few little basic facts, I've never read any of his stuff or anything like that. But I thought that her whole story was interesting.
Yeah, I have a copy of Secret Teachings of All Ages, but I haven't really read it. So
What?
yeah,
Yeah, I don't even have that.
I don't have time to read, man. So yeah, I just thought that was a really interesting show, and some of the things that she talked about, some of the skullduggery that was going on that not necessarily didn't surround Manly P. Hall, but some of the people that were around him. And do you know? She talked about like there was like a cult leader that started taking over. You any idea who that was or what that was all about?
Not off the top of my head, no. Yeah. I mean, he was someone that just seemed to kind of like get in with them. And then, Manly P. Hall died while he was still, dealing with him.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tragic story, and especially towards the end there.
And she was puzzled why he was falling for this guy's BS, because to her and her husband, it was really obvious that this guy was full of crap.
Interesting guy, though. I mean, just like prolific, how he would really just sit there on that chair and just freestyle those entire lectures about whole parts of history or esotericism or religions, mystery schools, like just all just out of his mind.
Yeah, Robert Guffey knows a substantial amount about him, and the book Bela Lugosi's Dead, it's a fiction book that Robert wrote, which we'll probably be getting Guffey back on the show here fairly soon. But Manly P. Hall plays a pivotal role in the book, and likes to insert Manly P. Hall in there a lot. So
yeah, listening to some of those lectures was really influential on me.
All right, so you can get those online too.
Yeah, there's tons of them on YouTube, or was. I don't know.
I think they're still up there.
We should we go listen to Manly P. Hall and Seth after all this.
It's okay.
So you do like a remix. So I want to talk about this little story that you read in Strange Disappearances. This is weird.
Yes, it's very weird.
I really would love to know the validity of this, whether or not, because so this book, when was it published, and who is it by?
So this is Brad Steiger. It was published in 72. Yeah, 72. Man, my copy is literally falling apart in my hand.
So is it from 72, the book?
Yeah, it's from 72.
Is it out of print, or is it like available?
It is out of print, but you can pick it up for like $40 on Amazon. That's
nothing, Adam. What are you grunting about? 40.
Yes, Seraphiel spends $300 on books on
it used to be a lot more. It used to be in the hundreds, and it's come down.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
interlibrary loan, people.
You can do that as well. Yes. And there's an internet library loan you can get it on. I found, but Steiger wrote 100 and something books.
Yeah, he was really prolific. He was the Nick Redfern of his time.
And I mean, they're all very short books for the most part. Yeah. Except for the very last one he did. So this thing's only like 150 pages. Yeah, 156 pages. And they generally sold well. I mean, they would just, whatever he felt like writing about, he threw a bunch of stories together in a book and put it out. And this one this is actually called Brad Steiger Explores the Astonishing Powers Behind the Strange Disappearances, which have baffled mankind through the centuries.
Gotta love that pulp.
Nice.
And the story you're talking about is Thomas P. Meehan. And we actually did look this up online to see if anyone had any further info, and nothing new has come to light from it. Would you like me to read this?
What's the story? Yeah.
The strange disappearance of Thomas P. Meehan, a 38-year-old Concord, California attorney and a referee for the State Department of Employment Appeals Bureau, on February 1st, 1963, would seem to suggest that a bizarre kind of distortion of time occurred in some mysterious manner. Meehan left Eureka for Concord at about 2 p.m. as he drove as far as Myers' flat before he stopped to telephone his wife and complained that he felt ill. She told him to spend the night at the motel and not try to drive through. It is from this point on that the time sequence becomes most confusing, all the more so when the startling climax of the day's events is realized. Approximately 5 p.m., Meehan checked into 40 Winks Motel at Redway. Approximately 6 p.m., the attorney drove to the Southern Humboldt Community Hospital at Gaberville to see a doctor. At 6:45, Meehan told the nurse that he felt as if he were dead. While she was checking on him and before he had seen a doctor, Meehan disappeared. At 7 p.m., a Myers Flat couple told the highway patrol they had seen the taillights of a car on Highway 101 drive into the Eel River. At 8 p.m., attorney Meehan was talking with Chip Noonamaker, the owner of the 40 Winks, at the motel. Meehan asked the innkeeper, "Do I look like I'm dead? I feel like I've died, and the whole world died with me." Noonamaker noticed that Meehan's shoes and trouser cuffs appeared wet and muddy. 9 p.m., Meehan went to his room. 9:30, motel employee Harry Young went to Meehan's room to tell him that the call he had put through to Mrs. Meehan could not be completed because of a storm that had disrupted telephone service. Young saw that Meehan had changed into a black suit and a white shirt. 10:45, the highway patrol found Meehan's car submerged in the Eel River, its tail lamps still shining like beacons for the searchers. Skid marks indicated that the vehicle had gone off the highway at high speed. Officers found blood on top of the car. The right front window of the car was open. Meehan was nowhere in sight, but droplets of blood and muddy footprints led up the bank 30 feet, then vanished. No trace of Thomas Meehan was found. Then, 19 days later, his body was discovered in the Eel River near Myers Flat, 16 miles downstream from where Meehan's car had veered into the river. The evidence of the autopsy suggested that the attorney had survived the crash with a superficial head wound, then later had died of drowning.
Okay, well, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
Now, it does remind me of some of the Politis stuff.
A little bit.
Where, there's not a body found till much later. But then you've got him telling people that he felt that he was dead. That he was dead already.
Yeah.
And the thing is that could he have possibly, I guess they said they saw him at 6:45. Was that at the hospital or was that at the 40 Winks Motel?
I think that was the hospital.
That was the hospital. So could he have somehow gotten in his car, pitched his car into the river, got out, and was just hanging around telling people that he already felt he was dead, and then went and committed suicide later?
Yeah.
I mean, that in and of itself is totally bizarre behavior.
He did have a head wound, to be fair.
Yeah. Now, did he have a head wound before the car
went
into the river? Okay.
No. Did Thomas P. Meehan's illness and confused state of mind leave him to weave in and out of hospitals and motel rooms and into a cold, swirling river? Or did that same confused but powerful mind exert an influence upon time and space? He says, if Meehan's automobile went into the river at 7 p.m., and it must have, since no other automobiles were reported missing or ever found in the river on that date, then how did he appear to be back at the motel to chat for an hour with the owner? Chip Noonamaker did make note of Meehan's muddy shoes and trouser cuffs, and the attorney's repeated complaint that he felt as if he were dead. Employee Harry Young saw Meehan at 9:30 and observed that Meehan had changed out of his wet clothing. Had Noonamaker and Young actually talked with a dead man? Although Meehan did not disappear without a trace forever, he certainly did disappear and reappear all during the evening of February 1st. And after he was last seen by Harry Young in his motel room, Meehan's body was not found until February 20th. Meehan's car was seen to plunge into the Eel River about the same time that he was sitting in the hospital in Grabersville waiting to see a doctor. The police found drops of blood and muddy footprints that led up the bank for 30 feet before they simply vanished. Could Meehan have made his way back to the 40 Winks Motel? Or did Tommy Meehan actually die by drowning when his automobile went into the river at 7? Could his ill and confused mind and the will to live have projected his image of himself to the nurse, to Noonamaker, to Young, while his actual physical cell floated lifeless in the Eel River?
Or was it an insurance scam? I don't know.
Well, they did find his body, so...
That did answer the question of whether, because they said they had muddy shoes, and I was about to ask you, was he wet? But yeah, they said that he changed out of his wet clothes.
Yeah, and I'm looking to see.
Yeah, that's weird. And Chris Ernst on the show, he said that there was some kind of condition where people felt that they were dead.
Yes,
but that seems like a much more permanent type of thing. This seems like. Rather, I don't know. It's almost. I think he seems like a nervous breakdown to me.
Possibly, yeah. Or he could have just been sick. I mean, he was saying he wasn't feeling good.
Yeah.
And we found one current article that didn't have anything new, and I'm looking at another one here that also doesn't really have anything new. What I'm wondering is, what was he wearing when they found his body? Was he wearing the suit, or was he wearing what he was earlier?
Yeah. See, yeah. So there is some incomplete information, probably.
The police said Meehan had been thrown from the car as it crashed into the river. He had banged his head as he was thrown out. He had landed in the water unconscious. That's why he had drowned.
I don't really know what to make of it, to be honest. I mean, you could try to sit there and figure it out that maybe he pitched his car in the river. He got out, started acting weird. Wandered back to the river, drowned, and walked in and died.
Maybe he's going back to get his car.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking to see.
But they got his car out of the river the same night.
Yes.
Right. So
he was found drowned in the river.
Yeah, and that was days later.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. This article basically says the exact same thing.
So we know that this actually happened. That this was a real thing.
Oh yeah,
nobody made this up, and then Steiger might have heard it or whatever.
Nope, there's police reports and everything else.
Yeah, that's bizarre,
and no good explanation. This particular one I'm looking at now is assuming he was a full-formed apparition.
Did anybody say they touched him? Did they go through the...
But that's the thing. I mean, it seems like you would know if you were talking to an apparition for an hour.
I think, like you said, the suit may have the key to the mystery.
Yeah, because if he was
wearing
found, but it does not say. But I mean, the nurse examined him at the same time that the car was going into the river.
Maybe he had a twin. Maybe it's like the Prestige.
So because it says around 6:30, Mr. Meehan showed up at a county hospital in Graberville. The emergency room was crowded and Meehan was told to wait. Witnesses remember him sitting in the waiting room because they noticed his dark eyes and haunted look. At 6:50, a nurse called Thomas Meehan up to the desk. She began asking him questions and filling out paperwork for the doctor. As she wrote her notes, Meehan kept asking her a question. "Do I look dead to you?" he asked. "I feel like I've died." Finally, the nurse finished the paperwork. She filed it and came back to tell Meehan the doctor would see him, but Meehan was gone. So at 7 o'clock, two people saw the accident many miles south of the hospital where a car skidded off Highway 101 and plunged into the Eel River. So that's only, I mean, if he was called up to the desk at 6:50 and to fill out paperwork, that's going to take at least 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas at 7 o'clock, his car is plunging into the river.
So he's in two places at the same time.
potentially, unless he wasn't in the car. But if he wasn't in the car, who was in his car?
Maybe he had a twin. That's the only. Or it's a genuinely supernatural, and this guy really was a ghost that was right when he thought he was dead, when he said he was dead.
He was living two probable realities at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I hope this is something that doesn't happen to people often, because I mean that would sure suck.
It was hard to see why the footprints ended. If the person had kept walking, he would have made more footprints. It looked as if someone had walked 30 feet uphill and disappeared.
Where are the footprints in, right?
Exactly. When he was found, his lungs were full of water, showing that he drowned.
Well, Seriah, just in closing, I want to talk a little bit about a couple of things. And one is the presentation you're going to give. We decided we're going to do this on July 29th. That's a Wednesday evening. So coming up here pretty soon as when this drops. Just what you're going to be talking about. And also at Strange Realities Conference this year, I think I have talked Chris Ernst into premiering, I guess, his documentary about you. So let's talk about those couple of things.
All right. As far as what I'm talking about, I'm not 100% sure, because it'll probably depend on what mood my mind is in, to what it wants to go into when I do the presentation. It'll probably be about how we perceive reality, how little of reality we perceive, and how this stuff could be hiding right under our noses without us actually being able to see it, and how that's not that strange of an idea based on how things work, both between our senses, the way our consciousness filters things, and what reality really tends to be. So that'll probably be the presentation.
Well, I mean, that's an excellent one. We should stick with that. So.
And as far as the documentary, yeah, we're still working on that. This was not supposed to be a documentary about me. This was Chris working on a project where he was going to interview a bunch of different Fortean researchers and stuff. And I think because he was having a hard time getting everyone he wanted for that one, and he was just like, well, I can just come see you and we can do this. And I'm like, okay. I mean, I'm not going to complain. I just feel a little weird being in that much of a spotlight.
Well, you are Seriah Azkath.
So he's still coming up a few more times here in the next few months. So we're going to film some stuff, maybe do some night recording at the graveyard and stuff.
Cool. Well, that'll be something, different. We got a lot of different things going on at the next Strange Realities Conference. We're going to have workshops, and a film premiere would really fit in great. I think that'll be great.
Yeah, and I think what we're going to do is we're going to have just like a question and answer session with you and Chris, and talk about the film, after it shows. I'm not quite sure how long the film is going to be, but I think he told me it's probably about an hour or maybe a little bit more.
Oh, okay. I never discussed with him how long it was going to be.
Yeah, so we're definitely going to do that. And I don't know if you're going to come to Nashville or not, but we're going to.
Neither do I.
We'll have you. We'll have you there some way.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
We will channel you.
Yeah, we'll channel you.
That might be interesting.
Well, guys, that's October 14th through the 16th. Got a lot of interesting things, like Seraphiel said. So, Seriah, in case no one knows by now, tell people where they can find your show.
www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And that has links to everything, all the social media, Patreon, everything, YouTube, Discord, Twitter, Facebook group, anything you could want, including email. Contacts are all there. And if you like metal, especially if you like hearing different stuff you don't hear everywhere else, www.thelastexit.org, which I just did our 28th anniversary of me hosting that show.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing.
It also amuses me that that's older than some of my co-hosts.
Do you have some of those older shows recorded, like from that time period?
The oldest one I have is from December 1996.
Okay, that's pretty.
And then I think we have one from 97. Back then, I didn't have any money, and the only way to record them was on cassette tapes.
Right.
And cassette tapes weren't cheap, especially when you're recording a 6-hour show. So I kept clips of stuff. There's like best ofs of some of the funniest stuff, which is currently not on the website. But yeah, there's a few full shows in the archive going back to 96.
So if you want to hear a very young Seriah,
exactly,
you should go to that website. All right, well, guys, Conspirinormal.com. Like I said, we're gearing up for Seriah to give his presentation on June 29th. Coming up here, that's going to be a Wednesday night, so it's a little bit different than our regular Friday night thing. And we look forward to seeing you guys there. But also Strange Realities Conference coming up October 14th through the 16th. We hope to see you guys there here in person in Nashville. If not, there is also a tier where you can just watch it online like there always is. And also our Patreon is available. You can join up on that too, and Serfiel can tell you where to find that.
You can find that at patreon.com/Conspirinormal.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. Actually, Seriah, Vincent Treewell's coming on next week.
Awesome.
So it'll be the next show. So looking forward to having him debut on Conspirinormal.
Vincent's awesome.
Yep. Thank you, Seriah.
Thank you.
If you would like to help the show, please consider becoming a Patreon at www.patreon.com/Conspirinormal or leave a one-time donation at Conspirinormal.com. And please check out our YouTube channel, Conspirinormal Podcast.